All right. Well, hello, and welcome to another great webinar in the Watermark Masterclass series for 2025. There are going to be roughly 200 of you here today to hear from Joanna Robinson, and this conversation is timely. As many of you are aware, our annual interim survey for 2025 was published just 3 weeks ago, and it's revealed that the proportion of executives preferring interim assignments has gone up quite staggeringly from 50% in 2024 to 64% this year, which is really interesting. It's a significant jump. And really reflective of the fact that nearly 60% of experienced executives in Australia are choosing to have a portfolio career. For those of you I've not met, I'm Grace Atkinson. I'm the newest addition to the Watermark team and an associate partner in the interim practice here. And I'm joined today by the founder of our interim practice, Caroline McAuliffe, my Sydney partners, AJB and Pip Westhoff, and our wonderful partners in Melbourne, Jacinta, Donna, and Francesca. And before we start, I'd like to show my respect and acknowledge the custodians of the Gadigal land of our elders past and present on which this webinar is recorded today. We've enjoyed and had the great privilege of being able to host some amazing and well-received webinars over the past 5 years on a variety of current and relevant topics, and we thank most sincerely the outstanding guest presenters who have provided practical and actionable advice. We thank them all for sharing their wisdom and their expertise, and if you missed any of those webinars, please feel free to watch the recordings available on our website. Today's webinar will be recorded. I've had lots of emails asking about that, and available to re-watch on our website in a couple of days. So don't worry too much about taking notes, relax and try and enjoy the discussion. For today's expansive topic on leveraging interim work to expand your career and build a strong professional brand, I have the great pleasure of introducing you in a moment to Joanna Robinson, who has done this very, very well. Jo has had a really interesting and relatable story to share with you all today, and this discussion comes at an opportune time. As I mentioned earlier, we've just released our annual Interim Executive Survey for 2025. If you haven't downloaded it yet, you can do that on our website. And it's a particularly compelling report. It's Watermark's 15th annual survey, where we've been able to reflect on 15 years of data, as well as make some predictions for the next 15 years. So this session with Jo will hopefully fill in a few gaps for you all in relation to one of the roles that interim executive work can play in your career. Our objective, first and foremost, is to motivate you to walk away feeling inspired, to think about the longevity of your career and the role that interim work can play in that, and whether it's a natural next step for you. So if you leave us with 2 or 3 practical takeaways, realistic tips, advice that you can apply to your own lives, then Jo and I will have done our jobs today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Today's presentation will run for somewhere between 45 and 60 minutes, with the opportunity to pose questions throughout, and you can use the chat box or the Q&A box to do that. Please ensure your options are switched to visible to panelists and all participants in those boxes, so then everyone can see your questions. And we will try and answer a few questions throughout the session, but we have time at the end for more Q&A, so don't worry if we don't get to your questions straight away. And as I said earlier, this is going to be recorded. So now more than ever, interim leadership appointments are being made to support change, transformation, or scale at pace. And as Nicole Scopel-Williams discusses in the foreword of this year's Interim Executive Survey, we're living in an era where disruption is no longer episodic, it's perpetual. And interim leaders are being appointed as they lead with urgency and integrity, delivering clarity and complexity, decisions in ambiguity, and outcomes that matter. They activate the human advantage, applying it with precision and purpose in the moments that matter the most. So on that note, I'd like to introduce our guest of honour, Joanna Robinson. Jo is the CMO at The Iconic, a role that she was appointed to on an interim basis 2.5 years ago. At that moment in time, Jo had led marketing teams in prestigious brands, including Estee Lauder, Unilever, Tyrrell's Wines, and even Chatime. However, had yet to operate in a business centered around an e-commerce platform. But this proved to be the magic in Jo's appointment. And her continued success and leading in a role that not only became permanent within 6 months, but now leads a large multidisciplinary team across marketing, sales, and customer experience. We'd like to kick things off by giving Jo the floor to give you a quick overview of her interesting career. Jo, welcome. Do you want to?
Thank you.
Sorry, and can you begin by providing our audience with just a sense of your journey, a couple of minutes about your career?
Yeah, 100%. Firstly, Grace, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I'm very grateful to Watermark and Caroline, who I met, God, 2.5 years ago, for the opportunity to be in this role, because I went in on an 11-month contract and here I am 2.5 years later, and it's been an amazing experience overall, both personally and professionally. So it is a pleasure to be here. I think here I am relaxing in my lounge room. I love this picture. This is the benefit of having creative in your team. We do amazing bio shots. So I'm going to interweave kind of the conversation that we're having today with kind of my overall life and career lessons. And I've done quite a few talks lately, and one at my daughter's college around kind of what I would tell my younger self, my 20-year-old self. So I think for me, the topic that we're talking about, how to break through, how to be, a strong leader, the journey as a woman in the career, but also the interim experience, I think it has to be interwoven with kind of looking back and saying, what are the things that I've learned? In terms of my career, I've been working, God, for 3 decades, showing my age. I started with Procter & Gamble in Perth. I'm a Perth girl. And I started as a territory rep. So everybody pretty much had to begin their career as a sales rep, so that they could really understand being at the coalface. So I did 18 months as a pharmacy rep. You have to kind of work really hard to build a profile that then, I guess, opens up opportunities for you to come east. So came east, God, 25 years ago, landed in Sydney, didn't know anyone, started in Parramatta with Procter. And the first half of my career then was all FMCG. So I've been in Procter, J&J, Colgate-Palmolive, and then I moved to the Middle East to look after Rexona for North Africa, Middle East and Turkey for Unilever, which was an amazing experience. I then segued into beauty. So I spent some time with Estee Lauder and L'Occitane when we came home. And then, I've kind of also dabbled in both wine and even bubble tea. So I think I'm an example, particularly in marketing, of really being a specialist in your core skill set, because I believe that marketing is a formula, it's a mix. And if you are an expert in that, you should be able to take it across industries, categories, brands, and even countries. And I'm definitely kind of testament to that. And then I left Chatime kind of 3 years ago. I was there for a couple of years and really focused on re-establishing their brand in the market. They had actually been around for about 20 years. I'm a brand builder at heart. That's the bit that I really love. And if you get the top of funnel right, it actually plays out across the whole funnel, and it's all about how you resonate with your customers. So I actually left Chatime, had a career break for a few months, which was lovely. It was over summer, so got super fit, spent lots of time at the beach, and then was sort of looking for the next opportunity. And this literally came up, I think, about a week later after I'd met with Caroline. And I had a great feeling about it right from the start, and kind of they dovetailed into all things e-commerce and fashion.
Thanks, Jo. That's really helpful. And now that we understand a bit more about your career, and love to hear a bit more about your current role, but can you talk us through, why interim work was interesting? Why did you come and have a meeting with Caroline? What sort of piqued the interest for you?
Well, I think what was really interesting for me was I'm a lifetime learner. So it's always about what's the next opportunity and how can I expand my skill base, but also expand my thinking. And I love the idea of kind of getting in, getting some really, getting some traction early. I'm a bit of a change agent. I love coming into things. In fact, I'm probably one of my strengths is going into businesses and or brands that need a turnaround. I always think that's easier than taking over a brand that's or a company that's kind of on fire, because if anything happens, everyone blames you. But it's quite nice to go in and say, okay, this for whatever reason isn't working. How do we pull it apart? How do we really kind of assess it from every angle? How do we then rebuild, and how do we do that quickly? And I loved the idea that Interim actually surfaced up all of those opportunities. So to get in, to gain traction, to assess the situation, to put some plans in place, you've got to kind of really go strategically to execution quite quickly. And then I guess the challenge with all of that is also about how do you do the stakeholder management piece? So how do you build trust quickly? Because particularly when, we were making some pretty big moves at the beginning there, the Iconic had got really addicted to kind of the bottom of funnel, like many e-com. We're coming out of, all things lockdown, where retail had had a very tough time, consumer sentiment was down. But I knew that we had this beautiful brand in the Iconic that we just had to put the defib on, to be quite frank. But I had to gain confidence and support quickly from, both the executive team, but also from GFG, because we are part of a global group, that we needed to kind of make some really big moves. So the challenge was in doing that as an interim in a much expedited time frame, as opposed to, I think, in a permanent role where you can go, well, I'm going to spend 6 months absorbing and listening and asking lots of questions, and then I'll come back with a kind of, sort of phased plan as to how we're going to do it. I think when you go in as an interim, you've got to move quickly. And so you've got to be really confident about assessing the situation very quickly, and then I guess negotiating and influencing in the right way to make the changes that need to happen.
Absolutely. And Joe, when we had coffee, you told me an interesting story about how this was a really opportune moment for you to do something a little bit different too, having worked so long in consumer and FMCG, luxury brands, retail, but not so much in e-commerce. I think it might be interesting for our audience if you maybe just reflect on what the opportunity was there to sort of broaden your skill set and experience too.
Yeah, 100%. I think what's really interesting, no, I'd never worked in an e-com. So, I have learned so much in the last 2.5 years, and I've been exposed to some really smart people. So working alongside tech and product, is really eye-opening. I mean, they are very smart in quite a different way from marketing smart. So it's really interesting. I think the power and the magic is in putting those two groups of people together. And I think e-com does that really successfully. So no, I hadn't done a purist online, player, but I was certainly interested to do so, as I said, in terms of expanding my skill base and my experience. Having said that, e-com as a channel within omnichannel, I had definitely had experience in. So, I think sometimes we overthink it. And one of the things I've loved about, sort of coming into the Iconic is that I fundamentally believe that the 4 Ps are the same in marketing. So who are you going after? What's your product? Where are you going to sell? What's your price, and how are you going to promote? Like the 4 Ps that I learned at uni over 30 years ago, they're still relevant today. And in fact, in FMCG, we talk about the 5th P, which is proposition, because I really believe you've got to be more than just the products and services that you stand for. And hence my love and passion for the bit that is brand, because otherwise, if you're just going to buy on price, there is no emotional resonance to that. You've got to be a brand that people go, that is the brand for me. So I kind of have always taken that at the core of everything, every brand, whether it's been in the Middle East. I mean, when I worked at Unilever, we had to land campaigns and products in Lebanon and Saudi Arabia. In Saudi, you couldn't use any human talent. In Lebanon, you could be really progressive in terms of, how you want to land that messaging. So I learned the power of kind of like, how do you adapt to different audiences? But all of it is about making sure that the 5 Ps are lined up. And I think when I moved into ecom, I came with that mindset, which is like, let's go right back to the beginning. One of my observations of the Iconic when I took over was that we were trying to be all things to all people. And I fundamentally think whilst you've got to have a wide suite of offering to appeal to many people in terms of where you're going to target your communication and who you're going to go after in terms of being relevant for, you've got to have a bullseye target. You've got to say, these are the people that love our brand already because we've spent 14 years building it. And so we need more of her. So it doesn't mean you don't go after new segments, but it means you get really sticky on the understanding of that customer. And I think the other thing about ecom is that it is rich with data. Like the data and analytics, we have a data science team who are amazing. We can understand behaviorally, how our customers shop, right through the line where they're browsing, they're wish listing. I mean, there are so many insights. And I think that the problem with that sometimes is you get kind of paralysis by analysis. And I think even more so in an environment where it's so data rich. And I think that one of the things I've always said, and we've between myself and my directors, we now have access to 30,000 of our members at the Iconic who are basically our consumer focus group. So I always say to my team, just remember that at the end of those data sets are human beings, and it's really important to go and chat to them. So that is something I think that I learned in my FMCG career, which is to kind of be really driven by consumer insights. And to do that, you've really got to understand what makes them tick, not just how they shop. So being able to bring that kind of approach into ecom and connect all the dots, I think has made us even more powerful because we really understand our customers, not just in terms of buying behavior, but how she actually, wants to move in the world and what her aspirations are. And, then you can really engage and personalize on a way more relevant, in a way more relevant way.
It's really interesting, and thanks for going into that detail, Joe, because I think one of the most common questions I get from people looking into interim opportunities for the first time is, is there an opportunity for me to try a new sector? Or will other people from other sectors consider me? I might have had a career in healthcare, but then there's so many synergies with other customer-centric sectors and, people who have managed workforces in different environments, like, blue collar workforces to financial services, and thinking actually this might be an interesting opportunity to sidestep. And hopefully you've encouraged some of our audience today to consider that. That's sort of a helpful segue into
Grace, sorry, I was just going to add to that
yeah.
because I think what's interesting now as an employer as well on that, I think there's a lot of benefit from the employee perspective in terms of, as we said, expanding your skill base. I also think one of the things I find really interesting, even in our company, is people will say, well, she doesn't have any fashion experience. And I said, well, I didn't have any fashion experience. And actually, I've just hired a new customer service head, and we were having a big chat about it. And I said, I remember an old boss saying to me, the first 6 months is before someone's indoctrinated. So the first 6 months is where they will totally be looking at everything from a different lens. And that is gold. Like you've got 6 months to absorb all of the observations and, sort of answer all of the curious questions that person has before they become indoctrinated and it becomes, this is the way we do things around here. So I think from an employer perspective, I love bringing people in that have really strong core skills that have come from outside fashion, because they will challenge my team in a way that, quite frankly, we need to be challenged because we need to do it better than our competitors. And I think to come at things with a different lens is truly of benefit, not only to someone looking to expand their career and to try a new function or a new industry, but from an employer perspective, I think there's so much gold in that.
Absolutely. And for anybody who's engaged with us as a candidate, they will know that the number one thing we want our candidates to get to the bottom of it is their value proposition.
Yeah.
It is the skills they bring, why they bring them, how they can bring them, because that makes them so much more transferable into other sectors and to understand how we can plug them into different environments. Yeah, no, thanks, Joe. That's great. And look, it's probably a good moment to pause then and ask the audience to help help us understand where they're at, and whether they have considered interim work by means of testing out a new sector or an industry. So we're going to do a poll. You'll see something pop up on your screen. So we'll give you all a minute to answer the question. Have you considered interim work by means of testing out a new sector or industry? So yes, I was clear about new sectors where I could add value. Yes, I was hopeful that interim work would open up new sectors for me. No, I hadn't considered it, but my interim assignments have opened up new sectors. Or no, it isn't relevant. Or I haven't taken on an interim assignment yet. If everyone could just take 10 seconds to click one of those, it helps us have a meaningful conversation past this point. And Ali's going to send us the data on that. Okay, interesting. Okay, so yeah, 30 so far, 38% were hopeful that interim work would open up new sectors for them. I think that's probably enough. Okay, 35% of people haven't taken on an interim assignment. So hopefully this is educational for them, Joe, and they come away with some of your
100%. Yeah.
wisdom.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. So meaning that they're interested in taking on interim assignments as well,
Yeah,
which is
exploring
great.
it, doing their homework. Oh, that's great. Thank you, everyone, for doing that. Joe, we're always intrigued to understand what's shaped leaders on their journey to executive leadership. I know the audience today would love to know how you've built your leadership toolkit. Can you take a moment to share some of your leadership highs and lows with us?
Yeah. Let me just see if I can get this to move forward. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so that's kind of the snapshot of my career. I mean, as I said at the beginning, you know, I've had the privilege, I think, of working across many brands. And interestingly, one of the I think one of the toughest experiences in my career was definitely franchise, because when I think about Chatime, you know, when you work, I would never change that experience. It was amazing because you basically have 100 and I think we had 128 small business owners who are emotionally invested. And I think that you've got to articulate the benefit of their investment in a way that they're not marketers. Most of them are not even that strong from a commercial perspective. They bought into a business for all of that infrastructure. And I think that having a small budget and having to articulate the value of that to people who don't necessarily speak the same language was a huge challenge, but also a huge learning for me. So I think every time you enter a role, I guess my point is think about how it's going to expand your skill set in different ways as well. I mean, I've worked on some enormous portfolios with some enormous marketing budgets. And back in the day when I started in marketing, you know, the biggest chunk of that was TV. So you would take millions of dollars and go and put it all into TV. Now it's way more fragmented and there's a lot more, you know, sort of science to it. But I think when you have smaller budgets, it's amazing how you really kind of vet every dollar to make sure that you're really driving that value. So I think that there is benefit to working in both the smaller brands and the smaller companies, and also the bigger ones as well, where there's a lot more money, but also infrastructure around it. So that's kind of the point about the breadth of the brands and the sizes of the businesses that I've worked with. This is where I segue into kind of some of the life lessons as well, if people are interested. But I mean, your career, you know, you spend so much time at work, so it kind of segues into the same thing. And I kind of wrap it up in these learnings that I've done a few different talks on this. So I'll talk for a couple of moments on kind of my key lessons that are very career related. And the first one, I mean, you can see that picture is me on a camel in front of the pyramids in Egypt. And my first lesson is just say yes. I think I have always kind of embraced life, and I just think when life throws you opportunities, instead of talking yourself out of them, which I think a lot of people do out of fear, it's like, well, what if I just said yes? And, you know, I go back to the beginning of my career when I was offered the job to come over here with Procter & Gamble. I didn't know anyone. I left all my family. I was like in my, early 20s. And it was scary. I mean, Perth's like a country town. So to be moving to the big smoke and not know anyone in your early 20s, there is a leap of faith there. And there were definitely a few tears. I've got very supportive parents who said, go off and have that adventure. I'm now doing the same, for my daughter who's about to finish college. So that was my first just say yes. I landed in Sydney, had this amazing career, met an amazing man. We've been together 25 years. So had two beautiful kids. Like all of that is because I said yes to an opportunity to move to Sydney instead of saying, this is scary, because sometimes life is scary. But on the other side of that is, amazing adventures. And similarly, when my daughter, who's now 19, was 3, my husband and I decided that we wanted to get some experience overseas, and I put my CV on a global website and kind of went through the recruitment process, over 6 months, psych tests, interviews, very comprehensive. And I remember the recruiter ringing me up and saying, okay, let's go. Do you want to move to Dubai? And I rang my husband and said, let's do it. We're moving to Dubai. Now, we had never been to Dubai. And interestingly, people's reactions, so many people were like, well, I think because of their own fear, they were like, but you've never even been to Dubai. What if you don't like it? And my husband and I said, well, if we don't like it, we pack up and we come home. But what did happen is we went for 6 years. We had amazing, amazing professional and personal experiences. I have my son over there who's now 15. My daughter was exposed, and my son, but he was a lot younger, but my daughter was exposed to so many different cultures and interesting people that she would never have had the opportunity in the same way had we stayed in Australia. And we came back 10 years ago. But I love that picture of me on the camel, because I literally the move was 2 weeks previous. So I suddenly, a girl from Perth, I'm on a freaking camel, got totally ripped off, I'm sure, in terms of the price that I paid for that. But there I am in front of the pyramids, and I'm having like a pinch me moment. I just can't believe that this is my life. I'm living in the Middle East. So I just think, say yes, lean in, take risks, and back yourself. The second lesson is around lift as you climb, which I say a lot to women, because I've worked for 30 years. I've got some amazing female cheerleaders in my life. And in fact, the next one relates to that, when it's about having good mentors, because, I actually have an exec coach, Varsha Whitfield, who's been amazing for me. I've got a previous boss who I now, for the last few years, have been teaching at uni with. She got me into that. It's something I absolutely love. If I had more time, I would do it more often. So the women in my life have been amazing. But on the flip side, I have also seen the other side of women, where we're jostling for position, we're trying to eradicate each other because we don't think there's enough room in the boardroom for more than one woman. And the reality is that we still have some leveling out to do on the playing field. I work with some amazing men, but it's definitely there's still some work to be done, quite frankly. And I think that women need to do that collectively and together and support one another. So I really believe in the lift as you climb, because I'm here because of women and men that pulled me forward. And I want to make sure that we're doing that as, for young leaders behind us as well. So that's a really important one. As I said, the find good mentors, you can pay them. I think you've got to invest in yourself. I've had Vashti now for 5 years. She's worth her weight in gold. She holds me accountable. One of the things she always says to me, or she gets me to say to myself, is, who are you being right now? Because how you do anything is how you do everything. And so I'm always stopping to say to myself, am I in alignment with my values? Am I in alignment with my purpose and the legacy I wish to leave? Am I showing up in the world in the way that is important to me? Because, the only person that can really assess all of that is you. And your brand, we talk a lot about branding, you are your brand. And I think you've got to constantly be sort of thinking about how you show up, and particularly in terms of your values. So my mum was an amazing mentor. She's now passed, but my mum was like a global journalist. Both my parents are journalists, and we lived all over the world, but she had a very strong moral compass. She was very much about what's right and wrong, and speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. So she was 5'2" and 45 kilos, and one of the most formidable women that I've known. Unfortunately, she developed Alzheimer's later in life, which is, a brutal disease. But, for the first 70 years of her life, she was amazing. So, and my dad, who's thankfully still with us, and he can be very brutally honest, but you also need that in your life. You don't need everybody telling you how amazing you are. You need some people who say, okay, you actually need to do some work in these areas, and kind of asking you the hard questions, I think, as well as being, your cheerleaders. So find good mentors is super important. I can't express enough how much that kind of has helped my career, but also me personally in terms of the legacy that I want to leave. And then this one, don't be a dick. It is actually related to being a good human. Like, I just think, and I've put it there, the only person you should try to be better than is the person you were yesterday. So I really believe in leaders. I love Brené Brown. I mean, I bow down because she talks about leaders being authentic and real, and vulnerability is a superpower. So I really believe that as a leader, we don't need to pretend that everything is perfect all the time. We have challenges as well. And I think I hosted actually at work yesterday an Are You OK afternoon tea, and we had a speaker who spoke about the importance of mental health and well-being at work. And it actually starts with kind of just acknowledging that everybody's got their own challenges beyond work. Work is one part of our life, and yes, it's a big part, but we're all balancing the rest of life, the partners and the aging parents, and the sick parents, and toddlers and babies and all of that. So I think just being kind to one another, and don't be a dick is really important as well. Hopefully I don't get in trouble for saying that, but and then the next one is around this too shall pass. And I say this because I love the fact that this relates both to the good times and the bad times. It's one of the famous Stoic quotes, and in fact, it is actually a tattoo now on my arm as a permanent reminder. Because, and this photo was from 25 years ago, my wedding day, in Coffs Harbour with my husband, and our beautiful friends and family, and both our brothers. And I still look at this photo and I get so emotional because it was such a beautiful, like, you're literally on the cusp of the rest of your life, and you're madly in love, and you're young, and all of that comes with your wedding day. And fast forward 20 years later, and the guy behind my husband, he took his own life, and he left behind 3 young kids. And then a year later, the guy behind me is my brother-in-law, and he also took his own life. So we're missing 2 massive, beautiful people from this, what was an amazing wedding day. And I'm saying this because I don't want to bring down the mood, but I think one of the things that grief teaches you is perspective. Everything will pass, and we just need to acknowledge, that actually the most important thing, I think, is people and the relationships that you have. And, I think knowing that the good times can be amazing, but they also pass. So enjoy them and just be present, I think, is the thing about all of that. I mean, I'm droning on. Grace, did you want to say anything?
No. So much to love there, Joe. It's yeah, interesting. I've had an interesting run-in with someone who had a tattoo who said this too shall pass, and she was taking blood from me when I was just about to have my 3rd baby, and my mother was dying, and I was trying to work out what to do with my business, and she sat down and it was on her arm, and I just remember thinking, okay, all right, so,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to be okay. So yeah, interesting. That's resonated for you. And it's the so much to love about the Lift as You Climb in particular. One of the interesting pieces of data that we have been able to collect over the last 15 years is around female participation in interim executive work. And unsurprisingly, it's doubled since 2011. And we know this is down to a multitude of factors. Generally, female participation in the workforce has increased, not doubled, since 2011. But better childcare, maternity leave, more
Yeah.
flexibility, all of that kind of thing. But we do know we have a long way to go. And female directors now hold 36% of board seats on ASX 300 companies. But we know, again, they're a lot of the same same women doing it. So lots to, still lots to achieve, but nice to see those figures. And, we have predicted that in 15 years, women and men will be equal in the, hold equal pace in interim executive appointments. So
Yeah,
um,
which is great.
I think a lot of that is about that sort of lifting as you climb. And some of us
Yeah.
forget to do it, because we get busy and get focused on our value propositions and things. So no, that's really interesting. Thanks. I was going to ask you about mentors actually, and really, yeah, excited to see Vashti there. She's a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, she
Um,
really is. She's been incredible for my career, but just for me generally.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? We talk a lot here at Watermark about engaging coaches and engaging mentors, and sometimes you have those official, contracted engagements like Vashti, where you're paying her for her time and she's holding you accountable. But mentors that come in and out of our lives as well. And one of the things that I always say to people when they have a moment or pause between roles or is to go back to those people who know them. Even if you are creating the new version of yourself, it's to go back to those mentors and talk to them. I know it certainly worked for me, and that formal engagement works really well because being held accountable is really important. Being prepared, but
Yeah.
talking to those mentors that have come in and out of your life, that have known you in different stages to help guide is really important. I think you've probably left our audience with lots of gold, bits of gold there, Joe. So, Joe, you're currently in a permanent role that was
I
in
am.
to begin with.
Yeah.
I'm interested, and I think our audience will be too, do you think that you approached it differently at the beginning, think with an interim mindset, than you might have another permanent role?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually unpacked this because I think it's really interesting. I mentioned at the beginning in a permanent role, you kind of go, I've got 6 months, you do your 90-day plan, you spend lots of time absorbing. You don't have the luxury of that, but at the same time, I found it very liberating to go, right. And I never for one moment thought about it being turning into a permanent role. I went, I've got 11 months to get
Mm.
in, and it was very clear what I needed to do. There was a very kind of prescriptive. I was being briefed by Erica. I mean, the Iconic was in a state of flux. So, the CMO before me, Dean, he'd resigned, he was leaving. Unbeknownst to me, Erica, he was the CMO, Erica was the CEO. Unbeknownst to me, she had also resigned. That wasn't public knowledge yet. So I think the Iconic was like, right, well, we've got some changing of the guard. We don't even know who the new CEO is going to be yet. So the CMO's just resigned. Let's, get someone in on a contract basis whilst we get our house in order effectively. But I think it was just perfect timing, to be honest, because I came in with a very clear remit was to really kind of, as I said, it's no secret that commercially the Iconic was in a tough, the market was, but the Iconic was in a tough space, and we'd been so kind of addicted to the bottom of funnel, and we weren't doing any kind of brand stuff, and we were declining in brand awareness, we were declining in active customers, like all the, we were declining in sales and profit. So it was like, right, we have to do some stuff differently. And I think sometimes when a company is at a tipping point, they're more brave in terms of making some changes. So I think they were like, right, let's get a CMO in and I really do believe that even their thinking at that point, if they'd been on probably more solid footing, maybe they would have gone for a more traditional e-com person. But I think they went, let's get someone in who's actually, got a lot of experience with regards to marketing, which of course I have because I've been around for a long time, but not necessarily in e-com. So more omni-channel and very FMCG. So I think that at the time they showed a lot of courage in terms of going, okay, instead of going round peg, round hole, let's expand it and kind of go square peg, round hole and see how that goes. And at the same time, I had an incoming, then a new CEO. So I never for one moment thought this could turn into a permanent. I was like, I've got 11 months to get in to make a difference, very clearly to rip it apart and put it back together in a way that and this is the really interesting thing, in a in a respectful, appreciative of everything that's already in existence. I also believe as an interim, you can't walk in and walk around going, that shit, why have you done it that way? Because you're just going to put people offside very, very quickly, and people have got to trust you. So you can't criticize everything that's been done. It's been done for a reason. And let's face it, the Iconic was a super successful brand for a long time before I got there. So a lot of it was about rebuilding, but I think you've got to seek to understand. So the way you actually engage people is to ask the right questions about why are we doing it this way? What do we think's worked about that? What do we think maybe hasn't? The facts are that there are some metrics here that are not moving in the right direction. So how do we problem solve those together? So you've got to be very collaborative very quickly. And as I said at the beginning, you've got to build that trust. And part of that, I think, is, again, showing up as someone who is values oriented, who cares about people. I'm fundamentally a big believer that you've got to get the people bit right, because that will drive the commercials, not the other way around. One of the first parts of my remit, again, I didn't know when I took over the role, but we had to let a lot of people go as part of a reorg. And so within the first 6 weeks, I was making over 60 people redundant. It was probably the most brutal thing I've ever done in my career. And I was introducing myself to people that I was then making redundant. So it was, awful. It was really awful. And I'm a big believer that it's about how you do that. So you do it with compassion and kindness. It's, you have to be cognizant that these are humans who have lives and livelihoods. And then, I mean, not only was that tough, but then my next challenge was to rebuild the culture, because when people have seen their friends and acquaintances move on, they're obviously very affected by that, and morale is low, and they live in constant fear that they're going to perhaps be next on the chopping block. So there was a lot, and I think that I just approached it with a kind of kindness lens, because most of us have been in those situations ourselves. So it's kind of really kind of applying that empathy lens, I think, to say this is a shit situation, but I'm going to work with you in a way that is appreciative of and empathetic of what you're going through. So that's kind of what I would say is you've got to get in and drive some. At the same time, you've also got to drive the commercial results. So you've also got, your bosses and GFG and the board who are looking for some fast results. So there's a lot to balance, and I think you've got to be very clear on what are the quick wins. So how are you going to win some trust that you're moving in the right direction? So what does that look like? But also some trust with your team, that they're like, okay, you're here to lead, and you're also someone that cares about our well-being. So there's a lot going on, but I think this is why interim is such a great challenge, because if you're up for it and you're wired that way, where you want to go in and make a difference and do it quickly, then I think this is a fantastic way to do it. It's a long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
No, indeed. And we are slightly running out of time, but I know everybody will be interested to know, was it hard to make the decision to stay, to take the permanent role when it was offered to you? Because it wasn't, a given from the
No, not at all. And
yeah.
the interesting thing is, even when we started to talk about it, my boss and I really had to do my homework and go in to decide whether or not it was the right place. It was not a foregone conclusion. It was like, and I actually, we have a great relationship, my boss and I, but I was a bit like, because he was almost like, you definitely want to stay. And I was like, well, no, I want to think, I don't know yet. I want to vet it with, is it where I want to be long term? Is it with the people that I want to work with 80% of my life, because you spend so much time at work? Is it a values alignment? Like that to sign up for something longer, I think you really got to kind of go through that. Is it the right culture? Is it the right fit? Does it line up with my purpose and values and all that stuff? So I did all of that work before I then said yes. And it was absolutely the right decision. And he was a big piece of that. I mean, he challenges me in all the right ways, and he was new as well. So we were kind of discovering the business together, and so we've had our moments, but we have a lot of respect for each other, and I'm excited about where the Iconic is headed. But it was I never took the interim role thinking I'm going to end up in a permanent role as the CMO as the Iconic.
Yeah, interesting. And Gary's asked an interesting question. He said, should we approach all roles as interim given the fluidity of the marketplace these days? I feel like your approach in the first 11 months is something we should all think about, irrespective of the type of role we enter. Hugh wants to know how specific your performance targets were in an interim versus an ongoing role. Do you remember what your targets were going in, Joe?
I definitely had some targets in terms of, well, my targets fundamentally were to turn around, sort of the NMV, the sales and profit. So to work, and I can't do that independently, but so to work particularly with Gail, who's my counterpart on the commercial side. So that was another thing. So we had to get, I think when I came in, there was and again, not individuals, but I think as two business units, you've always got commercial and marketing. And when things were going wrong, which they were blaming each other. It was like, well, we haven't bought the right product. Well, the marketing shit. So that was another thing. Gal and I are really good peers. I mean, she's also a really good friend, but I think once we started to make sure that it became less about blaming each other or each other's teams and working on what is the problem and what is the solution, and we have to do that collectively. So our relationship, I think, really the fact that we're so collaborative, that's had a really positive effect on how our teams work together and how we deal with the business challenges together. But then I guess on the other side, mine was very quickly to kind of shift the decline in brand awareness, to shift the decline in active customers. So there were some hard metrics there in terms of the shift that needed to happen from a customer perspective. I also look after customer service, so there's CSAT and NPS scores that I was also having to kind of make some traction in quite quickly. So yeah, there were definitely KPIs attached to the 11 months. And I think, one of the things I love about interim is, this is an interesting observation of myself and this experience, is that I actually think we should go into every role with that whole liberation of, right, let's get in, let's assess quickly and let's get going. Because I think whether you're perm or interim, that kind of mindset is actually how we should all approach it, especially in the market at the moment. Like, you don't have the luxury of 6 months to absorb and ask lots of questions. You're going to have to do that in a matter of weeks, to be honest, and then get some runs on the board. So I think that's a great observation that person just raised.
We were going to do another poll, but I'm wondering if we might have run out of time. Just wanted to see if the audience could reflect whether they've taken on an interim role that has become permanent. Ali is going to pop up a quick poll if everyone can take 10 seconds to answer that. Just, have you taken on an interim role that's become permanent? Yes, and stayed, or yes, but the role wasn't for me. No, I hadn't considered it, and I love interim work and intend to stick to short-term assignments, or no, but I'm open to it. We're quite open with candidates when we meet them that, some of our interim roles go permanent, roughly between 25 to 30% any given year. And it's always a possibility, and try and really gauge and work with candidates as to what their motivation is behind interim work, because we don't like to make promises that we can't follow through on. But yeah, okay. So 64% said no, but they're open to it. Yeah, and that's another thing. We have seen a bit of a shift in people this year, even though we've seen a real growth in people considering interim roles. We've also seen a growth in people who are still open to permanent as well, which is interesting. I'm just going through the questions there. Ian's given us quite a meaty one, and Ian, I might email you separately, because the long-term commitments and legacy, often that's not. It's usually quite an immediate need that interim is addressing rather than long-term. Certainly in Joe's case, Joe, I think that you've given the audience a lot of great tips here. I think I'd like to finish off by asking, what role do you think interim might play in your future, and what would a great portfolio look like for you in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm definitely never say never, but I'm very settled at the Iconic, and I think I make the decision with myself every year. I think you need to do that. You need to say, again, is it ticking all the boxes for me? Is it related to my purpose and my legacy? And I'm very clear about kind of what I want to do in the next 10 years. And this role definitely ticks the box for me. I have aspirations to be a CEO at some point. So that, that is as far as I'm concerned, that's in my future. I have this mantra I always talk about. My husband and I talk about fuzzy vision. So, you've got to know where you're headed, but you've got to keep it fuzzy, because that way you're open to opportunities, as they come. It could be another gig overseas. You just never know. So I think, I say I want to be a CEO at some point, and that is kind of my fuzzy vision. I also am very keen to do, I'm just starting to look at board roles, and I do a lot of speaking, because one of my purposes around the next generation, particularly of female leaders. So I do mentoring and speaking, and that's really important to me, and teaching, of course. I've been teaching at Sydney Uni in leadership and marketing, and I'm an interim, so I kind of do use the expedited ones over the vacation and holiday breaks. But that's the way I see interim being able to fit in, is to kind of be able to balance all those elements of your profile and personality and career goals. So it doesn't need to be the one job anymore that people have for kind of 20 years, unless you feel you're growing within that. There's definitely an argument that says that can work. But I love that interim will enable someone like me, who has, many interests and many passions, to be able to balance all of that in a way that makes sense.
No, very wise words. Thank you, Jo. I think you've given everybody a lot to think about here, and thank you for being so open. A couple of people have said thank you for your authenticity, and I thank you as well, because it's the only way we can learn. And we have a great community here of interim executives all over Australia and we really value that community. One of our biggest roles is to make our interim executives feel heard and connected and well networked. So thank you for doing that today, Jo. I am going to wrap that up. Please, everybody, connect with Jo on LinkedIn, connect with me. Feel free to send us some questions if you have a burning question that wasn't addressed here, or you weren't game to put it in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, go forth boldly.
And Grace, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed our chat. Thank you.
Me too, Jo. Great to see you. Thank you,
Great to see you
everybody.
too.
Bye.
Bye.